I want to take you back a few minutes before we move forward. You brought up, and it was like you were reading my cheat sheet here, the craft you mentioned, and that's been a talking point now for months. It was outside the US. In this podcast Discord chat, it's much more civil than it is online, and people were discussing those. It genuinely is, and people were quite nicely discussing that comment and the debate, and it was all had very kindly, and you had some supporters, others a little bit more frustrated, was around why exactly you aren't allowed to say where the craft is. And I wonder, is that protecting sources, or what would happen if you came out today on this podcast and said, okay, Andy, the craft is in France?
Let me tell you, I can't tell you the country it's in. It's not America. But what I can tell you is that the place where it is kept is used for another purpose that is a laudatory purpose. That's as much in your interests in your country in the UK as it is in mine in Australia and as it is in America. So the simple reasons are that, there are other uses for the place where this object is stored.
And we could end up with a Storm Area 51 type scenario if you came out and announced it.
I can tell you, mate, that would be a nightmare. Absolute nightmare. And, it's funny. I know a lot of people think journos just publish and be damned, but, I've been in situations where I've known the identities of active intelligence operatives in countries overseas, and I've realised, Christ, if I published this, I could jeopardise their lives. So there is an element of source protection as well. I mean, I don't want the personnel in those facilities to be hurt. And it could create an international incident. I mean, it's up to the US to make a judgment about, if somebody like I know this. I was laughing the other day because somebody said on Twitter, oh, yeah, Coulthart must be lying because he couldn't possibly know this. He's just a journo. And it's funny, many is the time I've wished to myself, I wish I didn't know a lot of this stuff, because as a journo, it's actually a bit of an overwhelming responsibility to have to make these judgment calls. I actually frankly wish somebody in the US intelligence community would show leadership and develop a spine and go to the White House National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, and say, Mr. Sullivan, for God's sake, let us put out some kind of a statement. Because we really are at that state at the moment. So many people privately know what's going on. And I'm sorry to sort of talk in vague, oblique hints, but what's going on is pretty bloody horrifying and confronting and outrageous. And I know the White House knows about it. And the reason why, for example, I suspect Thomas Monheim, the Inspector General of the intelligence community, put out such a, how do one say this politely, evasive response to the inquiries from the congressman asking about whether he was taking David Grush's allegations and complaints seriously. He didn't deny that he was doing an investigation, but he basically denied doing everything else that's within his powers. And I know for a fact he's doing an investigation because I've seen conclusive evidence in the last couple of weeks that his investigators are talking to people to investigate Mr. Grush's claims. I've been presented with absolutely incontrovertible evidence that the Inspector General of the intelligence community's investigations are ongoing. And so the only reason why he, as an executive appointed official, would be reluctant to speak publicly and admit what he knows is because the White House is putting a blanket on what people can say and what people can talk about. And I know this might shock people, but I'm actually quite sorry for the Pentagon. I feel sorry for Susan Goh, the PR person for the Pentagon, who has to try and put out all the fires on this because, frankly, I don't think the president is showing leadership right now. He's so distracted by his own personal scandals, he's not thinking about the implications of the gradual unfolding of the biggest story in human history. If you were the US president right now and you were facing corruption scandals and uncertainties in the Congress about your continued leadership, and I think we're looking at that possibility. I'm hearing that the president's capability to continue to operate as president is seriously open to question. Wouldn't it be a great moment if he showed leadership and actually instructed his national security advisor to actually pick up the reins and say, listen, yes, this is what we know. Yes, it's been kept secret from you. Yes, there are certain things that we're going to have to keep secret for national security reasons. We're not going to talk about X. But we can tell you, and I think they should, we are aware of a non-human intelligence engaging with this planet. And the reason I say that they should say that is because I know the evidence is incontrovertible.